With Tyre in ruins behind him, Alexander marched into Egypt expecting resistance. Instead, he found something he had never once experienced in his entire campaign: a nation that wanted him there. But peace in Egypt would not last. Deep in the Persian heartland, Darius was assembling the single largest army the ancient world had ever seen. Scythed chariots, war elephants, and soldiers from every corner of his empire. Between these two moments lay a journey through fire, faith, and prophecy. A desert pilgrimage that would convince Alexander he was no longer just a king, but something far greater. This is Chapter 4, Egypt, the Oracle, and the Road to Gaugamela, the final chapter before Alexander and Darius would meet for the last time in the greatest battle either had ever fought. The Persian governor of Egypt, despised by his own people after years of harsh rule, surrendered without a single sword drawn. Alexander entered the ancient capital of Memphis as a liberator, not a conqueror. Egyptian priests, thrilled to be free of Persian rule at last, crowned Alexander pharaoh in a grand ceremony at the temple of Ptah, declaring him a living god in the eyes of an entire nation. For a king raised on stories of gods and heroes, the moment struck something deep. In Greece, he was a conqueror. In Egypt, for the first time, he was being treated as something divine. That feeling would not leave him. Soon after, Alexander announced a journey few of his generals understood or supported, a dangerous trek deep into the desert to consult a legendary oracle. The Oracle of Ammon lay at Siwa, an isolated oasis deep in the Libyan desert, reachable only by crossing hundreds of miles of scorching, waterless sand, where entire caravans had vanished before. Days into the crossing, the party lost its bearings entirely. Water ran low, the guides argued over direction, and for the first time since landing in Asia, Alexander's expedition faced death by nature instead of by the sword. According to a legend, two ravens appeared from nowhere, circling low and guiding the lost party through the storm, leading them against all odds safely to the hidden oasis of Siwa. When the palm trees and cool spring waters of Siwa finally came into view, exhausted soldiers wept with relief. Ahead of them stood the temple of the oracle and the answer Alexander had crossed a desert to find. Alexander entered the temple alone, leaving even his closest companions waiting outside. What was said inside between the king and the priest of Ammon has remained a mystery for over 2,000 years. Alexander emerged changed. He told no one exactly what the oracle had revealed, but from that day forward, he quietly began to believe himself the son of Zeus Ammon, a god made flesh among mortal men. His men noticed the change immediately. Their king had always carried himself with confidence. Now he carried himself with something closer to destiny, as though the entire war had already been decided in his favor. Whatever the truth of the desert oracle, one thing was certain. Alexander returned from Siwa more convinced than ever that nothing, not even the vast Persian Empire itself, could stand in his way. Returning to the Egyptian coast, Alexander stood before a narrow strip of land between the sea and a lake and saw something no one else could yet imagine: the sight of an entirely new city. He personally walked the boundaries of the future city, marking out streets, harbors, and temples in the sand. a metropolis designed to outlive every empire that had ever existed before it. He named it Alexandria after himself, the first of many cities that would eventually carry his name across 3 continents. None would ever grow as great as this one. With Egypt secure and his new city rising from the sand behind him, Alexander turned his army east once more, toward Mesopotamia and the final reckoning with Darius that both men knew was coming. Darius had spent nearly 2 years preparing for this moment, determined not to repeat the mistakes of Issus. This time, he chose his battlefield with obsessive care, a vast open plain near the village of Gaugamela. His army was staggering in scale. Soldiers drawn from India to Ethiopia, scythed war chariots designed to shred infantry lines, and 15 war elephants, creatures the Macedonians had never once faced in battle. By some ancient estimates, Darius commanded over 200,000 men, a force so vast it would take hours simply to march from one end of the battle line to the other. Against this, Alexander commanded barely 47,000 men. On paper, it was not a battle at all. It was supposed to be an execution. Darius intended to make absolutely certain of it. As Alexander's army crossed the Tigris River, moving into position for the coming battle, something happened in the night sky that stopped soldiers in their tracks across the entire camp. A total lunar eclipse swallowed the moon whole, plunging the sky into darkness. Ancient armies read omens in the stars, and both sides desperately searched for what this one could possibly mean. Alexander's priests declared it a sign of victory. The sun, representing Greece, would soon eclipse the moon of Persia entirely. Morale surged through the camp exactly when it was needed most. On the night before battle, Alexander's most trusted general Parmenion urged a bold night attack, hoping to catch the massive Persian army by surprise while it slept, unprepared and vulnerable. Alexander refused the plan outright. He would not, he told Parmenion, win his greatest battle by creeping through the darkness like a thief. He intended to beat Darius in the open, under full daylight. "I will not steal my victory," he reportedly told his generals, a line that would echo through history for millennia and reveal exactly what kind of king Alexander believed himself to be. That night, while Darius kept his exhausted army standing at arms for hours, fearing the very night attack Alexander had refused, the Macedonians slept soundly, rested, and ready for what was coming. As dawn approached on the 1st of October, 331 BC, Alexander finally woke, remarkably calm, remarkably rested on the morning of what would become the single most decisive battle of his entire life. On the plain of Gaugamela, 2 entirely different visions of warfare now faced each other in the pale morning light. One built on overwhelming numbers, the other on discipline, speed, and absolute nerve. Darius positioned himself at the center of his line, surrounded by his finest guard, war elephants, and scythed chariots poised directly ahead, determined to personally witness Alexander's final defeat. Alexander rode along his own lines one final time, meeting the eyes of soldiers who had followed him across deserts, rivers, and mountains. Men who trusted him completely, even against these impossible odds. He raised his sword high above his head, and the entire Macedonian line answered with a single thunderous battle cry that rolled like a wave across the plain. toward the waiting Persian army. Darius gave the signal first. 200 scythed chariots surged forward across the open plain, spinning blades gleaming, aimed directly at the heart of the Macedonian infantry lines. But Alexander's men had trained for exactly this. As the chariots closed in, the Macedonian ranks parted in disciplined lanes, letting the deadly machines rush harmlessly through empty gaps in the formation. Alexander watched the failed charge with narrowed eyes, already searching the vast Persian formation for the one gap that had won him Issus, the same fatal weakness he now intended to exploit again. The scythed chariots had failed. The real battle was only just beginning, and somewhere across that vast, dust-choked plain, Alexander and Darius were about to meet for the very last time.